Who will benefit from this presentation? Managers who are interested in the role that project leadership serves for project management, and managers who intend to champion advocating effective project leadership, and they need a compelling call to action. And the reason I have champion in quotation marks is because it's just been my observation that although it's nice for senior executives and to sponsor ideas and innovation, often they are preoccupied with firefighting and short-term priorities. It's typically managers 1, 2, 3 levels down in the organization chart who kind of are passionate and ask themselves, how long do we want our organization to continue to perpetuate the behavior we have today? And they're the ones that'll basically be an advocate for change. So if you're 3, 4 levels down on the org chart, fine. I like presenting to you. So leaders and followers, and I've got quite a few quotes throughout this presentation. A leader without followers is just taking a walk in a park. That was, I think, in the promotion for this webinar that CAI put up. So picture a cruise ship that is sailing without a captain. Ask yourself, will it reach its destination? So the question is, how does a leader secure followers? So my agenda is, I'm going to start with a basic premise about the entire the presentation. Then I'm going to, with project leadership, I'm going to give some definitions, traits, and skills, and that's going to take about 20 or 30 minutes. I'm going to give some examples from authors, consultants, and a pope, one of the popes. I want to let you know, typically my presentations for CAI are on enterprise and corporate performance management. I had to spend about a half a day searching on content for this topic of project leadership. Then I want to distinguish project versus strategy management. And once we get into strategy management, then we're going to transition into strategic projects, the strategy map and balance scorecard with KPIs. You may have heard of it. I'm going to get a little more detail, the difference between key performance indicators and operating performance indicators. They're all measures. They're all important. They just serve different purposes. And then I'm going to conclude showing you how does all of this stuff, well, before I conclude, how does all these pieces fit together? And then a real frustration of mine at the end. What's taking so long for organizations to advance? So my premise is this. Traditionally, project management is referred to as the organizational tool extensively used to work to derive definite goals and considered a finite life cycle. However, in recent years, the project management role is expanding from just being the tool to achieve a set of goals. Today, project management is considered as a mechanism for executing and managing the executive team's strategy for an organization. Again, I'll be talking about that the latter half of this presentation. Now, in my presentation, I have quite a few quotes that I got from a very good friend, Stelios Kontritis. He actually was the country manager in Greece 20 years ago. We're good friends. Every battle is won before it is ever fought. Sun Tzu. So let's talk about project leadership. What is project leadership? Project leadership implies leading a team in such a way that the end result is a super successful project. It is your ability to get all project activities done perfectly as a team without triggering any sort of conflict. Simply put, project leadership is all about lending a hand during challenging times and leading from the front, even when the tide is not in your favor. A project leader keeps their team motivated and ensures that each task is executed perfectly during the development process. Besides ensuring the quality of deliverables, they strive to prevent time sinks and cost overruns. And you'll recognize that I just read that entire slide, and the source is at the bottom. And I want to manage your expectations. I'm going to actually be reading many of the slides probably for the next 20 or 30 minutes. So kind of think of it like you're at a kind of a library or a bookstore and the author is reading from their book, but it's just the most efficient way for me to transfer knowledge from me to you. Later on, then I'll get a lot more flexible, conversational when I get to the second half of the presentation. So the first one is from this Elita Torres that I got by doing a Google search, Traits and Skills of Effective Leaders. Here are 12 leadership skills for project management asked of business professionals, executives. And since I'm going to go through each of the 12, I'm not going to read them here. What she did was she actually interviewed 12 different people. And here's an example, this Nikita Lucaretti. Number 1, emotional intelligence. In order to be an effective leader and project manager, you must have emotional intelligence. Without a deep understanding of the personalities of your teammates and an understanding of what motivates them, you won't be able to encourage everyone to work together and accomplish your goal. Moreover, when problems arise, the stronger your emotional intelligence, the easier it will be to navigate your team's challenges and how to overcome them. And I did send these slides to Stelios, and he came back and added this sentence at the bottom: project leadership comes before project intelligence and after emotional intelligence. Number 2, to be detail-oriented. To be a good project manager, you must be very detail-oriented. With so many moving parts and various points of communication, it is important that you stay on top of things and ensure everything is going according to schedule. Even the smallest delay can cause a domino effect that can derail your project. Number 3, enthusiasm. The one skill I look for in project management is enthusiasm. When managing a large project with multiple team members and lots of moving parts, a positive attitude from management is the key to success. When faced with challenges, it is vital for the ship to be steered by a manager that not only knows how to communicate the importance of the work, but is excited to accomplish the goals and objectives of the assigned project despite the obstacles. This enthusiasm should be genuine and come from a real place of concern for the project's well-being. Number 4, conflict resolution. A necessity for project managers is conflict resolution. When working in a project management workplace, there is going to be a big push on meeting deadlines. When you have a team of people working under a strict schedule for long periods of time, conflict is inevitable. Being proactively ready to deal with this will allow you to remedy conflict quickly when it arises. Make sure you have a plan in place and all the team members know what is expected when a conflict comes up. This will save you time, energy, and stop emotions from getting out of control. Number 5, provides clear and direct communication. Being a successful project management leader requires an individual who practices a style that will encourage two-way communication with staff. A successful leader will have the ability to provide and communicate goals, but also show a willingness to consider other opinions as their team moves forward toward action. Number 6, knowing when and how to pivot. The skills required to execute the successful management of any project are many. According to Upwork, with almost 42% of the United States workforce still working remotely, even additional skills must be considered. However, when it comes to project management, the ability to know when and how to pivot will always be imperative. We all know that all projects don't always go according to plan. However, a strong leader will know when it's time to go back to the drawing board and get a little innovative versus spending precious time on a process that is no longer viable. Number 7, identifying the root causes of problems. One of the most important project management skills is identifying the root causes of the problems. The project manager usually coordinates the activities of people with different working and communication styles. That amplifies the need for uncovering the real reasons why certain project tasks are not completed up to the standards. Cutting through the noise and personal bias enables achieving an objective and realistic perspective on the projects. Number 8, one of my favorite, inspiring people. Inspiring people is a key leadership skill for project management. In many cases, you are competing for time and attention against other priorities. Therefore, you have to find ways to inspire people to work on your project. For example, you might appeal to an ambitious person's desire to present and look good in front of executives. Another person might have a different motivation. Taking the time to understand people individually helps you inspire effectively. Number 9, balanced. A successful project manager understands the importance of balance as they lead a team through a project. Project managers are responsible for sticking closely to a schedule and required tasks while balancing that need with flexibility and openness to new ideas. They have to balance budget limits with resources that their project team truly needs. Perhaps most challenging, project managers must balance the big picture with the small details, recognizing and explaining the overall vision for the project and also paying attention to how each task and process fits into the project. Number 10, accountability. The best leadership skill you need for project management is being able to motivate your team and hold them accountable. As the famous saying goes, inspect what you expect. Don't expect perfection with projects, especially with new projects or with new hires. Check in weekly on projects to keep the momentum going. As a leader, you have to keep the excitement there. Hold your team accountable and ask, what would you do differently next time? Number 11, approachability. The best leadership skill that a project manager can have is approachability. If you want to get things done as quickly and effectively as possible when your team needs to trust you and feel comfortable approaching you with questions. Having a great relationship with your team can also help when you are approaching deadlines and need a push to get over the finish line. Therefore, take some time to get to know all of your team and find out what you need to do to keep them happy and engaged. And finally, number 12, ability to delegate. A leadership skill for project management is learning to delegate. Lots of managers make the mistake of not knowing how to properly delegate tasks for the best employees and mistake checking in for micromanagement. This can lead to a lot of frustration if not handled properly. Now, I recognize I read all those, but I would like to think that as I'm sharing this information, they're resonating with you and you're putting them in the context of your own situation. Some of the attendees here, you may be project leaders. Some of you may be project workers looking up to project leaders and basically triggering some ideas about their performance. Quote number 2 from Benjamin Franklin: fail to plan is planning to fail. So some additional examples. John Kotter, I have him at the bottom, one of my favorite Harvard Business School authors, no longer living, comparing management versus leadership. They're not the same thing. Leadership is different than management, but not for reasons most people think. Managers follow rules and may be risk adverse. Leaders take calculated risks and are risk managers. So management is about coping with complexity. That's why you have, org charts and spreadsheets and the like. Leadership, in contrast, is about coping with change, which is accelerating. And just on my experiences, I've seen some managers, lower level employees who got promoted higher up, and unfortunately, they just managed more intensely, more spreadsheets and the like. It's really about inspiring people. Management copes by planning, budgeting, control with organization charts and staffing battles. Leadership creates vision, sets a direction, and inspires people. Now, this slide is from a toolbox by David Miller. Again, I have the source and actually links at the bottom to where I extracted this information. He has 4 leadership skills in the toolbox. 1, team management. Identify right project executives for each assignment. 2, communication. The more you communicate, the better your team will understand the project requirements. Encourage your team to share their ideas on how to improve quality without extending deadlines or budget. 3, staying positive. Keep your cool. You must be positive if you want to identify the root cause of problems and develop impeccable solutions. 4, time management. Every minute matters, especially when you are working on a complex project. Delegate tasks, set realistic time limits. Now, Pope John Paul II. Actually, when I Googled this, there's all sorts of links, and I just chose one of his essays or his description of leadership lessons. Number 1, sacrifice. 2, be genuine. 3, be courageous. 4, lead by example. 5, be knowledgeable. 6, communicate. 7, be inspirational. And I recognize, as you are, there's some redundancy here, but that's good. That's reinforcement that there is consensus about these. Finally, another is a book called Integrity, The Courage to Meet the Demands of Reality. The author, Henry Cloud. 1, being good at your job. 2, working well with and through others. And 3, character, which is defined as the ability to deal with reality. And in this category, he wrote 6 tasks. They are: connect authentically with those around you that will lead others to trust you. I can't underplay the importance of trust. Trust is really so fundamental here. Next, be oriented toward the truth, because lying or avoiding reality never leads to positive results. Next, work in a way that gets results and finishes well. Find the most efficient path to success. Next, embrace, engage, and deal with the negative, instead of hoping that it will go away or that the problem will fix itself. Next, be oriented toward growth, both personal growth and corporate growth. Finally, be transcendent. There are things much bigger than the leader. Now, this one's sort of provocative, because this is, and I won't say that this Rob Goffey and Gareth Jones, the authors here, are being pessimistic. I'll let you draw your own conclusion. There are no universal leadership characteristics. They're kind of spoiling my entire presentation. Modeling yourself after successful leaders, for example, Jack Welch at GE, Lee Iacocca at Chrysler, Bill Gates, Steve Jobs, Troy Branson in the UK, does not work. The best leaders are consistently themselves, even while modifying their behavior to respond to changing circumstances. Build off who you are and who you already are. Employees look for authenticity when they decide whether or not to give your directives their full support. Finally, it is unlikely that you will be able to inspire, arouse, excite, or motivate people unless you can show them who you are. Remember the title, What Sets Leaders Apart from the Pack? So now I'm going to transition to contrasting project management versus strategy management. Just to repeat, in my premise, one of the earliest slides, I said today, project management is considered as a mechanism in executing and managing the executive team's strategy of an organization. Now, a frustration of executives is the failure to execute their well-formulated strategy. And there's some empirical evidence on this. There is an executive recruiting firm in Chicago. Their name is Challenger, Gray, and Christmas. And they monitor every year the involuntary turnover of CEOs in North America. And get ready for this. It's increasing every year. More CEOs are terminated. And I believe the reason why is because board of directors, post Enron, those of you who are old enough to remember the Enron collapse, they take their governance job seriously. It's no longer ceremonial, show up at the board meeting and get a nice paycheck. They take it seriously. And an example would be Carly Fiorini at Hewlett Packard. The board of director, they gave her a couple of years to implement Hewlett Packard's, revised strategy. She failed. They fired her. So let's now expand beyond project management to strategy management. And this will involve the balanced scorecard and a strategy map. And I'll describe what those both are. But to confirm that this is relevant, this is a survey of executives way back of their largest concerns. Look at the first one at the top, executing the strategy. So the next several minutes is going to be a bit of a primer, a little bit of as if we're back in the university and I'm the professor explaining these methods. And I draw on work from Dr. Kaplan, remember the man who taught me how to do activity-based costing. He then went on with Dr. David Norton to really start creating this whole methodology. And there's 4 books at the top by Kaplan and Norton. If you're interested, the 4th book at the right, the Execution Premium, is probably the best one because it kind of includes information from the previous 3 books. And then Paul Niven, a consultant I worked with at KPMG, couple of books at his bottom. Now, why the interest in a strategy map and balanced scorecard before I go to the cartoon? What Kaplan and Norton recognized is that executives were overreacting to financial results, profit and loss, reported at the end of the fiscal period. They said, you need to shift your attention to non-financial metrics measured during the period, and then respond and react to them, and then the financial results will be positively impacted. But there's a second reason Kaplan and Norton created this. Most employees, even managers under the executives, do not understand the executive team strategy. I mean, imagine I went into your organization. Those of you who are working for companies, incidentally, if you are consultants, think about one or more of your clients that this would apply to. So I imagine I go into your company in the hallway, I randomly interview 15 employees and say, quick, 30 seconds. Can you articulate your executive team strategy to me? How many of them could do it well? Typically, when I'm doing these presentations with live audiences, I get a lot of nods, no way, Well, if managers and employee teams don't understand the executive team strategy, then how do we expect them to understand what they do each week, each month contributes to executing the strategy? And I think this Dilbert cartoon kind of reflects this. A hacker broke into our system and found out our corporate strategy. Did he post it on the internet? I would like to read it. I am also curious about my objectives for this year. Do you have the guy's email address? A good example of, I don't understand the strategy. Quote number 3 from Rick Page: hope is not a strategy. So here's the primer about strategy map and balanced scorecard. You'll notice in the ellipses at the bottom, the strategy mapping goes into the balanced scorecard. I'll get to that in a second. But above both of them is something arguably more important. It's the vision and mission statement. That's really the responsibility of the executives. That's their job. Their job is to set direction. Their job is to answer that question on the vision statement: where do we want to go? But what a strategy map and a balanced scorecard answers is a different question. How will we get there? What are the various projects or initiatives? What are some of the core processes that we need to get better at? Now, many organizations allegedly claim they have implemented a balanced scorecard. In fact, when I was with SaaS, we had software, but many of the software vendors have these tools. I would ask our customers, do you have a strategy map? And they'd say no. In fact, sometimes they look at me, what's a strategy map? This may surprise you. I believe a strategy map is orders of magnitude more important than the balanced scorecard. The balanced scorecard is just a feedback mechanism. The real intelligence, the GPS, if you want to accept that analogy or metaphor, for the balanced scorecard is strategy map. And I'm going to describe it in just a next few slides. Strategy map and its balanced scorecard are mechanical. They help realize the vision and mission of the executives. So here is a generic picture of a strategy map. What Dr. Kaplan and Dr. Norton created was these 4 perspectives that have cause and effect relationships from bottom to top. Now, those rectangles, and I'm going to show examples in the next few slides, in there is going to be strategic objectives, typically 2, 3, or 4. But the way the perspectives work with cause and effect relationships from bottom to top is at the bottom is learning and growth and innovation. That's typically the soft domain of employees. Are they learning? Are they innovating? If you're accomplishing those strategic objectives, they'll contribute to the next layer up, internal process improvement objectives. If you're accomplishing those, then they'll contribute to the next level up, customer retention, customer loyalty, customer satisfaction. And if you're doing all of those, they'll contribute to the financial strategic objectives. And you may say, well, aren't those common, uniform for all companies? No. Smaller companies may be strategic objectives. Financial strategic, is growth. For mature companies, it may be cost management. But the whole intent here is to maximize shareholder value. Now, here is a fictitious example of a strategy map with the 4 perspectives. And they kind of explain it. You start at the bottom. A learning environment will stimulate process excellence. That will then lead to the customer intimacy, retention, satisfaction, and that creates the financial value for the shareholders. So here's an example of a strategy map. And this is actually for Southwest Airlines. Now, this is before their recent trouble. But the little bit of the history on Southwest Airlines is back at their early stage, they only had 3 jets. They needed to get a 4th jet so they could continue to 5, 6, 7 jets. But they didn't have the money, the capital to get the 4th jet. And so their executive team said, maybe a way to do this is get radical. Rather than when the plane lands taking 60 to 90 minutes, to refuel it and get the passengers off and the other passengers on, how can we speed that up to like maybe 15 minutes? Think of it like an Indianapolis 500, pit stop. And so at the very bottom, And so examples, what they did is they said, flight attendants, you're going to clean the plane after the passengers leave. We're not going to have a cleaning crew come in. Also, for passengers to get on, no fixed seating. It's the cattle come in and everybody kind of picks their seats if you've flown on Southwest Airlines. So let's look at the strategic objectives in the ellipses, starting at the bottom. Ground crew aligned to strategy, and then example of that also might be the ability to, put special nozzle gas hoses in that didn't exist before so that they could quickly refuel the plane. So to the left, develop necessary skills, the ellipse that's still down on learning and growth. And to the right, develop those support systems like the special nozzles for gas fuel. That then contributes to the internal process strategic objective. We need a fast ground turnaround. So for accomplishing those, then the strategic objectives in the customer perspective is offer low prices, so that we can grow demand, have adherence to flight schedule on time, and then attract new customers, retain existing customers. And then the strategic objectives at the top, increase our revenues, lower our operating expenses. Remember, if the flight attendants are cleaning the plane, then we don't have to pay for, a cleaning crew, and ultimately gain in profitability. So example from a real world strategy map. Now, there has been a change in the last few years on how consultants implement the strategy map and balanced scorecard for their clients. And incidentally, I have a pretty wide network with a lot of the consulting firms. I am an alumnus of KPMG and Deloitte, but EY, PwC, Accenture, BDO, Grant Thornton, I like to interact with them and learn from them what they're doing. What I've observed is in the last several years, where they used to design and create the strategy map and balanced scorecard only with the executive team, they changed to where they basically, and I'll describe it in this slide here, to involve the managers and employees. Now, each of the 5 columns in this diagram are those strategic, are what was in the strategy map, each one of those, rectangles. And so what this slide is really saying is who is responsible for what? The executives or the managers? So when we start with the strategic objectives, of course, that's the executive's job. Remember, set direction. They define the strategic objectives. But where the consultants have now changed the implementation is they're saying, now give the strategic objective and map and delegate it to the first line managers. Have them identify what are the projects or initiatives to accomplish those strategic objectives, or in some cases, a core process you just need to get better at. And then next, have the managers and employees identify the KPIs. Even though the executives could define them and maybe even better, this is basically involving the managers. Why? Because they're going to have buy-in. They're the ones that define the KPIs. They're going to have to sleep in that bed. But now we have targets. That's the way that strategy map and balanced scorecard work. When you put targets that may actually be involved with the bonus and compensation system, this motivates the employees to focus to accomplish the objectives so that the metrics, the KPI, basically get met or even exceeded. It's like a carrot with a donkey or mule. And then we've got the actuals, although I probably should put a horizontal row, the computer, because today the computer can measure everything. Now, after the managers and employees identified the projects, initial KPIs, then kind of like volleyball, they can then debrief with the executives and they can kind of tweak them till, we have the final KPIs for the balanced scorecard. Notice at the bottom, I've got a scorecard is more of a social tool than a technical tool. And I'll tell you this, I find every year that I get older, how much I underestimate the importance of behavioral change management. It's important. People like the status quo, and resistance to change is really universal. And we'll talk a little bit about that later. So imagine a way to kind of summarize this is, Imagine if every employee, every single day, could answer this one question: how am I doing on what is important? How am I doing on what is important? The first half of that question can be easily answered when the employee turns on their computer screen in the morning. They look at the 2 or 3 KPI strategic dials for themselves and their group. Is it favorable or unfavorable to the target? The real challenge is the second half of this question. What is important? How do we define these KPIs? Strategy map and its balanced scorecard provide this answer. The overriding purpose of a strategy map and scorecard system is to make mission and strategy everyone's job. It's almost like making, owners of the organization with the employees. Now, again, based on my experiences in the past with customers that use strategy software or a balanced scorecard software, I'd ask them, hey, you've got our software in. How many KPIs do you have? And they say, oh, 200. That's 200. That's fabulous. How can they all be a K? You can't have 200 key performance indicators. So I want to share with you the difference between KPIs and OPIs. And because I'm going to go through this quickly, if you're interested, this is actually from a 10-page article I authored. There's the link to it. And the next slide is going to be Exhibit 3, page 7 of 10. So how does it work? Let's first see the KPIs and the OPIs. The KPIs are strategic, okay? OPIs are operational. They're all measures. They're all important. They just serve different purposes. So some of the differentiators. KPIs must be derived from the strategy diagram. You're kind of like tailoring a man or woman's suit of clothes. You just don't go to some website and, oh, here's our industry, oil and gas or insurance or banking, and use generic ones. They need to be uniquely reflected in the strategy map. And notice I've used the word diagram instead of map because some organizations like Dow Chemical in up northern Michigan, they created a 5th perspective on safety and health as an example. Next differentiator, KPIs must have targets. That's the carrot and the stick. Without targets, they don't qualify. OPIs at the bottom, they can have targets, but they don't need to. They could be trend analysis or upper bound, lower bound, alert thresholds. Next to the right, frequency of reporting, quarterly, monthly, but once we get a little more frequently, weekly or daily, we're now in the land of operational performance indicators, not strategic KPIs. Now, this one will be of interest to all of us here in the project community. KPIs must be 2 types, project-based and process-based. But when I ask companies, hey, how many of your KPIs are project-based? They look at me like I'm from Mars, like, what's that? Examples of project-based KPIs, and you will all be familiar with it, would be milestones of a project or percentage of completion. And the reason that project-based KPIs are important is because strategy is about change. It's not about doing the same thing over and over again a little bit better. That's what projects do. They have beginnings and end. And then ultimately, and I'm not going to go to it in this presentation, the budget is typically disconnected from the strategy, and we want to basically connect it. And we can do that by holding those managers accountable for those projects and initiatives I mentioned in the earlier slide, measuring them and tying their bonuses and compensations, whatever incentives, with the strategy of the executives. So a couple of definitions here. KPI is monitoring the progress towards accomplishing the strategic objectives. So it's strategy management. A definition, though, of an OPI would be measuring a process. And see, in the balanced scorecard, you have those interconnections. Remember, cause and effect relationships. In contrast, OPIs can be just in dashboards. So this is the difference between a scorecard and a dashboard. Dashboard, just like in your automobile, fuel, speed, and the like, they're not necessarily connected. Whereas in the balanced scorecard, We have cause and effect relationships, bottom to top. If you're interested in a technique to implement a strategy map, I'm going to describe something I've been doing for clients. It's kind of based on what I call managers learn by doing, not by reading a book or what have you. And this involves a one-day workshop based on strength, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. Some of you have heard the term, this acronym SWOT. And what I do, if you look at the photo at the left, the night before the workshop, I have the executives now, that just starts with the executives, complete 20 SWOT on yellow Post-its, strength, weaknesses, opportunities, and threat. Then when they come in the morning, 8:30, we start on the wall. Now I've got the perspectives horizontally, learning and growth, process, customer, financial. I say, take each of your 20 Post-its and put it under one of those 4 perspectives. So can you see that photo on the left? There they are. Now, I say to them, for the next 20 or 30 minutes, without talking to each other, which is tough for executives, look at some of the Post-its that are similar to other ones that your colleagues put up there. And since they're stickies, move them into groups. And see the middle photo? That's a result a half hour later of clusters of yellow Post-its. And then what I do, you can see these 8.5 by 11 white sheets of paper. I say, let's look at that one and describe how would we word that as a strategic objective. Okay. Now that's by 10:30 in the morning. Now the rest of the day, now you can look at the picture to the right. There's the executive team in the room. On the wall are the perspectives and the strategic objectives of the 4 perspectives. One by one, I ask them, what would be a project or initiative to accomplish that objective, or in some cases, a core process to improve? And then what would be an example of a metric that we would measure to monitor that we're accomplishing that? And that takes 3 or 4 hours, because notice we probably have, if we've got 3 objectives for each of the 4 perspectives, 3 times 4 is 12. We got to go through 12 of those. And of course, now there's conversation and about their company and so forth. At the end of that session, I then tell them, you've got 2 paths to go. You can come back in this room and do this again more slowly. I'm getting on the plate and getting out of here. Teach you to fish, you can fish on your own. Now you understand how it works. The second path that you can take is now delegate the strategic objectives to your first line managers and give them 1 week for them to identify the 2 or 3 projects or initiatives or core process, have them identify the KPIs. And what's the benefit of that? Buy-in. You're going to hold them accountable when you put targets. So if they basically put the measures themselves, then they're going to have to live with them. But it also solves another problem. They're going to understand the strategy. Remember my example of randomly interviewing 15 employees in the hallway? Can you articulate the executive team strategy? The managers will understand the strategy in order to do the next step. So if you're interested more about this, send me an email. I'll tell you how to do this. Quote number 4, plan pessimistic, think realistic, act optimistic. Again, from my good friend, colleague, Stelios. So let me kind of showing, how does all of this stuff kind of fit together? Corporate performance management. And just, to clarify, corporate performance management or enterprise performance management, EPM, CPM, they're synonymous. It's not a process. It's not a system. It's the integration, of multiple methods. And many of these methods have been around for decades, some even before computers. Examples, profitability analysis, not just stopping at the product or standard service line, but going below the product gross profit margin line to include distribution expenses, selling expenses, marketing expenses, to get a profit and loss statement for each customer. of course, you have to basically treat the calculation of overhead allocations using activity-based costing principles. And that's a whole other debate. I know a lot of people, oh, ABC, too complex, too messy, too big, not worth the effort. That's wrong. Although that were problems in the 1980s and 90s and 2000. I have a rapid prototyping technique for that, similar to that balanced scorecard one, can implement a successful ABC system in 3 weeks, not 6 months. Is the climb worth the view? You don't have to be perfect. There's a technique on that. Other examples would be enterprise risk management, lean management for process improvement, all these moving parts. Think of them like gears in a machine. The problem is when companies do implement these various methods, they implement them in isolation of each other. So you've kind of got the pricing and quoting and profit analysis people in one part of the building. You've got the process improvement, lean management people in another part of the building. You've got the enterprise risk management people in some other part of the building, and so on and so forth. You get a lot more power and synergy when you seamlessly integrate these various methods, again, like gears in a machine, and even more power when you embed in each of the methods analytics of all flavors, regression analysis, correlation analysis, clustering analysis, association analysis, segmentation analysis. And I know as I just read those 5 techniques, some of you said, oh, I took those courses in college. I just wanted a passing grade and get the heck out of there. Well, sorry, it's here, data science. But the good news is you don't need to dig your college textbook out of the attic or the basement, but you do need skill sets in your organization that do have competencies, with these. So let me show you a diagram that I created of how these things fit together. Think of this like a circulatory system, in your body with your heart pumping blood through your veins. The big box at the bottom is your organization and its resources. That's basically your employees, your assets. Think of it as the capacity to do work. I want to point out that customer loyalty, I've got an arrow going all the way to shareholders. This is a truism. Customers are the source of value creation for shareholders and owners. We need to make that connection. Okay, so let's start with the customer loyalty. To the left is the strategy and mission. Remember, that's the executives. That's their job to formulate the strategy. Then they will communicate it to their employees with scorecards and dashboards and KPIs. And then those basically go back into the organization, with the feedback. Now I've got a CRM that stands for customer relationship management. The company basically, especially marketing and sales, is always asking which types of customers are most attractive to retain, to grow, to win back or acquire. Which types of customers are not attractive? And when you've got customer profitability, which is always shocking when you do it the correct way, because sometimes organizations say, oh, our largest sales customer is unprofitable. How can that be? Well, God, they demand so much stuff as changing delivery schedules, never buying standard, always special, always calling help desk, always returning goods, so we get some real truth. Now, the counterclockwise arrow, that's really the process people, lean management, Six Sigma quality, management. That's kind of the world of the ERP, enterprise resource planning. What they're doing is take the customer order, complete the order, accept the hospital patient, heal the patient. So let me show you a little bit more. Well, before I show you this, go deeper, where's management accounting and analytics in my diagram? I deliberately left it out because the output of management accounting and analytics is the input to so many different places. It's pervasive. Now, to walk you through what I did at a higher level, we start with customer satisfaction. To the left, the executives will formulate strategy, typically based on the needs of the customer. I know some of you took MBAs and you're Michael Porter, 5 forces. We can 5 forces for strategy, we can get that in there. Now, from the strategy and mission down, we get risk management, strategy map, KPIs. Now, from the scorecards back into the organization, feedback. Remember that question, what if every employee could answer, how am I doing on what's important? By looking at their radio dials every morning. But if every employee can answer that question, then how are we doing on what's important? So that whole left side is strategy management. And remember, my premise to this presentation was project management with strategy management, and they're really hooked together. Then we've got the targeting. Remember, going from the organization to the customers, which type of customer most attractive, retain, grow, win back, and acquire. Also, how much can we optimally spend, basically doing those things with price discounts, coupons, offers, and deals. Then we've got the counterclockwise circle, process improvement, take the customer order, complete the order, and so forth. And so I'm hoping that you can see these bubbles flowing through the system now. Again, think of this like the blood vessels in your body. But if any one of those is restrictive or constrictive, then the money isn't going to flow to the shareholders. It's going to leak into the sewer. It's not going to basically go all the way because we've got waste, we've got inefficient processes, poor targeting of customers. So I'd like you to view this picture, this slide, as really a goal, really an aspiration for your organization to get to have no leakage, optimize all these moving parts together. And again, projects are so fundamental in how all of this works. A way to think about everything I've been talking about today has to do with this diagram. It's the return on ROI, return on investment from information. Now, the issue here is most people think of return on investment on tangible assets, but there's a shift from ROI as the source from tangible assets like machines, trucks, computer, hardware, software, to an intangible asset like information. And in this diagram, notice the ROI from information increases left to right exponentially as we go from data to information to knowledge to insights to decisions. The problem is many companies and many organizations are stuck in the first 2 red bubbles to the left. All they have is raw data and standard reports. All they can answer is what happened. Now, in some cases, the 3rd red bubble, the IT director or chief information officer gives some of the managers and employee teams some drill down software like Tableau, I think they're owned now by SAP, Microsoft Power BI, Python, R, SAS, my previous employer. But then managers who get that report, and then they can drill down to see like a line item of an invoice or a purchase order that's an anomaly, but they're still restricted to only answering what happened. Enterprise and corporate performance management begins at the first blue bubble, modeling, descriptive modeling meaning last month, last period, using analytics. Remember, the strategy map is a model on a single page. I know some of you don't have management accounting backgrounds, but costing is modeling. Costing is not the T accounts and journal entries that the bean counters use. It's modeling how resource expenses basically transition into calculated cost of products, services, channels, customers, and the like. Once you're at that first blue bubble, you not only know what happened, you know why did it happen. And the reason why is there because the causality principle, cause and effect, is so important in any type of model. You may be hearing about the twin systems. Twin systems. Twins are, we got the physical system, and then we create computer models to map to the physical system. Now we get to the fifth bubble, the second blue bubble, predictive modeling. Now the future is coming at us, next month, next quarter, next year. Now we get into the area of budgeting, rolling financial forecast, what if scenario analysis, investment justification analysis. When we're at that bubble, we not only know what happened, why did it happen, descriptive modeling, but what can happen. What are the possible outcomes? What are some of our options? That's where scenario analysis comes into play. And you may have noticed when Susan started me out on my first bio page, there were 4 books. The one to the right was Predictive Business Analytics. I co-authored it with Larry Maisel, a partner I worked with at KPMG. And when we wrote that book, I go, oh, well, that's Mount Everest as high as you can go. Well, since then, there's a higher level, prescriptive analytics, which is basically optimization. And the way to think of prescriptive analytics is at the last bubble is not only do you know what happened, why did it happen, what can happen, possibilities, what's the best choice of what happened or what can happen. And that could involve linear programming and the like. So let me start winding down with my frustration. What is taking so long for the adoption rate of many of these methods? I'll start with quote number 5 from Mark Twain. Data is like garbage. You'd better know what you are going to do with it before you collect it. So why has the adoption rate for the corporate performance management methods, which includes project management and project leadership, been so slow? Well, there are 3 barriers, and let me start with the first one. And since, my audience is typically CFOs and accountants, they don't particularly like me, though, because you can tell I've been a little critical of them. Many of them are in the 1960s. I like to say I'm an engineer masquerading as an accountant because, basically I rely on my engineering skills, my industrial engineering and operations research. But the first barrier are technical barriers, dirty data, low quality data. But the IT function has tools like extraction, transform, and load, ETL, which can, like a water purification, can clean the data. If from a larger company, you may have multiple divisions with different hardware vendors. We've got Hewlett Packard, we've got Dell, we've got IBM, but IT can fix that. The next barrier, number 2, is the perception barrier that it's of excess complexity and affordability. Oh, activity-based costing, way too complicated. It's not worth the effort. Take us 6 months to do it. Every employee will have to fill out a timesheet, and employees hate timesheets. There'll be 3,000 activities. IT will have to extract drivers. All of those are misconceptions. As I mentioned, ABC system can be implemented in 3 weeks. Same thing with strategy map. And there's commercial ABC software vendors that are pretty reasonable, so that's not the issue. The biggest barrier is the third barrier. It's got nothing to do with systems. It's got nothing to do with software. It's got nothing to do with technology. It's all about people. And it starts with resistance to change. People like the status quo. Only babies like change, with diapers. But there's other barriers that are behavioral. Fear of others knowing the truth. Oh, I don't want other people to know, what the profits are. Project management. Oh, I don't want anyone to know that we're running behind or we're over budget. Fear of being measured. Fear of being held accountable. It's all cultural. And leadership. I'm going to say it, weak leadership, which is really what this presentation is meant to be, is how to improve leadership. Not every company's leaders have the highest IQ, So you really need to have some behavioral change management skills. And of course, if I was in a room with all of you and I said, raise your hand, how many of you got degrees from the university in sociology or psychology? None. We're all Newtonians. What do I mean by that? Like Isaac Newton, to us, the world's a big machine. Give me the gears, the pulleys, the dials, We need to be a little Darwinian, like Charles Darwin, the organization's an organism, sense and respond. So What I'm showing here now is a contrast using one of my books to the left, Performance Management. Notice there's greasy, grimy gears there. Imagine that some of those gears are broken, the teeth are broken, the gears are disengaged from each other. Someone threw sand into there, you know. If you put that into your automobile, the car might still run, but what would your fuel efficiency be? Very low. Now, right side, titanium gears, digitized, lubricated, moving faster revolutions per minute, integrated. Now put that in your automobile. What's your fuel efficiency? Much higher. Now replace the fuel efficiency with the metaphor or analogy of rate of shareholder or owner wealth creation. That's what we're doing with all of these methods I've described during this webinar. Make the revolutions per minute of the corporate performance management and business analytic gears spin better, faster, cheaper. That's the cost reduction. Safer, bring in risk management. Smarter, strategy map. Now, I want to get a little serious here as I conclude. And some of you are probably saying to yourself, Gary, you are serious. You've been serious through this whole thing. Well, now I'm going to be a pretty funny guy, but this one I'll get a little serious. I believe in the past, the best leaders and the best executives had the best answers. Today, I do not think that's the case. Today, I think the best leaders and best executives have the best questions. There's too much volatility. There's too much complexity. There's too much uncertainty for them to rely on their gut feel or sixth sense or types of answers they had earlier in their career that got them promoted to be at the top. They need to create a culture of discovery and investigation. This is where data science and analytics comes in, and tolerance for making mistakes, as long as you learn from your mistakes. So let me conclude with action steps. Get educated. Thank you very much. You're doing that by just attending this webinar. Get buy-in, resistance to change is big. Rapid prototyping, start small, think big, do iterative remodeling, start with a workshop. And then incentives, and I don't have expertise in motivational theory, but I just know that it's really important. It's probably aligned with inspiration. Resources, when you get this presentation slides, there are already many links that are in the beginning, and then I've added 3 more links here. So from theory to practice, your success depends on how well and how fast the right information and intelligence gets to the right people. There is my email address. If you want to send me questions direct, my website.
Thanks, Cary. Great presentation as always. Thank you. We did have someone ask if they can have a copy of the presentation. Rosera, we asked that you contact Gary via email, and he said he would, send that out to you in the PDF form, right, Gary?
Correct.
Yeah, perfect.
This has got nothing to do with any of this stuff and maybe everything with all of this stuff. I was my high school class president in Chicago, Riverside, Brookfield, go Bulldogs. And we had our 55-year high school class reunion a year later because of COVID. I always have to do the class president speech. And a remark that I made there, and I want to say it to you now. The best things in life are not things. They are relationships, friends, relatives. Keep thinking about that. So thank you very much for inviting me.
Thank you, Gary. One of our friends for sure. Well, thanks everyone. And thank you for joining us today. And Gary, we always appreciate your time. Thanks so much, everyone. Have a great day.
All right.